Thank you, everybody. And once again, I welcome you all to this timely event. Please, let's all just take our seats so that we can, yeah. All right. A very warm good afternoon. Also, good morning, good evening for those joining us virtually as we convene today to discuss a very timely topic revolving around the Summit of the Future, which is upcoming in September this year. The focus we'll be having on today's event, as you are all well aware of, will be on UN Security Council reform. So yes, before we begin, let me just thank our honored panelists for joining us today. His Excellency SRSG Parfait, Ambassador Takada, and also shortly Excellency Ambassador Rebecca Otengo will be joining us. Let me also invite our founding director, Dr. Salamon Derso, who will be joining the panel, but also providing welcoming remarks as we open this event today. So yes, thank you once again.
Okay. Thank you very much, Theon. I would like to start by joining Theon in thanking uh, our distinguished panelists who would be providing us their reflections on a timely topic whose currency would become even greater as the Summit of the Future approach. It would take place in September. Uh, Negotiations around the outcome of the summit, taking the form of the Pact of the Future, have already started in New York. So, Excellencies, Your Excellency, SRSG, Afe, Your Excellency, Ambassador Rebecca, Your Excellency, Ambassador Takada, Excellencies, Ambassadors, distinguished ladies and gentlemen present here in the room and also following us virtually. A very warm welcome to today's event. Today's event is organized in view of the African Union Summit that is scheduled to take place in a matter of days. Among others, the summit would consider the report of the Committee of 10 of the African Union, which is a committee that is responsible for the reform of the Security Council. It is a committee that was established in order to advocate for and promote Africa's common position on the reform of the UN Security Council. Africa's common position was adopted in 2005, also known as the Isilweni Consensus, as you all know, which was also accompanied by the CERT decision. But this event is also an event that is meant to provide us with an opportunity to also connect Addis Ababa and New York. Addis Ababa are the hub where African diplomatic and policy making takes place. Whatever discussions and policy decisions that are made here in Addis informs the engagement of the Africa Group in New York. And therefore the importance of this connecting Addis and New York. We are at a very difficult moment in the history of international relations, particularly international relations since the Second World War. Some may say that this is actually that Gramscian moment. The old is dying, the new is not born. We are in that moment of transition, which is very, very difficult, fluid, and full of uncertainties. I think we see a lot of this playing itself out. We see global power relations shifting. We see the return of geopolitical rivalry and contestation. Uh, if the events that we have experienced so far are anything to go by, it looks like that it's worse than what was obtaining during the Cold War, and therefore the return of big power competition and rivalry and contestation with a vengeance of some sort. We also see the fallout from the COVID-19 pandemic, both in terms of the socioeconomic implications and ramifications of that, but also how it has affected international relations and trust between different parts of the world. Uh, Most recently, of course, we are also in the middle of cost of living and debt crisis affecting various parts of the world, perhaps more forcefully here on the African continent. And these major global changes and trends are of huge consequence for Africa. They directly affect the socioeconomic, political, and security well-being of the people of the continent. And that is also one aspect of the discussion that we need to have. And the other aspect is, of course, in this context, leadership is being exercised, particularly at the level of the UN, by the Secretary General himself, both in political as well as thought leadership terms, by advocating for and campaigning and using his position for the reform of the multilateral system in order to avoid the sharp edges and very turbulent consequences of these dynamics that are at play at this point in time. So, from both perspectives, Africa has direct and very huge stake, depending on how we mitigate and possibly overcome these holy crises. Africa may benefit. Of course, as you know, Ambassador Takada a couple of years back authored about these changes and what they mean. He rightly opined that when there is a conducive international environment, it is always beneficial for Africa. And when the international environment becomes sour, we have to be careful. There is a danger that our vulnerabilities and crisis conditions may actually end up entangled with global competition and therefore making their resolution beyond our reach and capacity. Right? So the importance of this particular moment. So there is a lot that is coming, and it is in view of that that we have the pleasure of partnering um, with Japan in organizing this particular event. There are a number of questions that we would like to raise, and then that would lead us to kickstart the discussions. So, from a historical perspective, obviously, the uh, question of the reform of the UN Security Council is now being considered as part and parcel of the effort for the reform of the multilateral system. But the issue of the reform of the UN Security Council has been there before these discussions about reform of multilateralism take this particular shape at this particular point in time. But there is urgency. There is a lot of factors that are pushing for this reform of the Security Council. The question is, structurally, what kind of reform would this entail? Would it entail and necessitate the expansion of the membership of the UN Security Council? If there is going to be expansion of the membership of the UN Security Council, as the reform would require it, then how big a size are we imagining and envisaging for this expansion of the membership of the UN Security Council, and who would be represented and taking these new expanded seats in the UN Security Council. Africa has a proposal on the table in the form of the Isloeni Consensus, with two permanent seats and five non-permanent seats. That is what is contained in the Isloeni Consensus. And there are a number of different proposals from other parts of the world and from different groupings around the reform of the UN Security Council. If reform is going to happen, reform of, would it include, for example, permanent membership, or would it include also permanent membership plus expansion of non-permanent membership? Would it also entail what may be considered to be an expanded years of membership in the Security Council rather than the 2 years membership for elected members? Would there be what may be considered to be partial permanent membership? And what are the models, for example, if an expanded seat is going to be in place? What are the models for assigning those seats to, to countries or to basically different parts of the world? Would it be on the basis of, for example, the continent rotation, or would it be on the basis of saying basically you assign it for one country and then that one country occupies it indefinitely, permanently? Would there also be a reform of the veto power? And what kind of reform? Would permanent membership, expansion of permanent membership include veto power? But it's not simply the inclusion of new members with veto powers that may be the issue. It would also be how veto power itself is exercised. What kind of reform do we need to have for the exercise of veto power? There is small reform that happened over the course of the past 2 years, which requires that whenever one of the veto holding powers exercises a veto power, it has to go to the General Assembly and explain itself to the wider membership of the UN. Is this adequate enough to enable accountable and responsible use of veto power, or do we need something more and better? How about process for making a determination about, you know, a supermajority countering veto power? Is that something that can be on the table, that can be part of the option, whether that is with what you may consider to be a double supermajority from the Security Council and that of the General Assembly? What are the possibilities for that, right? And how about actually the idea that there is reluctance, there is hesitation for expanding veto holding power, right? And if that is the case, how about the possibility of actually doing away with veto holding power? That is, for example, what some leaders in the Caribbean proposed and advocated for. And that is the kind of approach that Africa also supports. If nobody has a veto power, I think that's a position that Africa, if there's going to be veto power, of course, Africa's demand would also include veto power representation, right? And then what are the working methods reforms that need to also happen in terms of transparency, in terms of decision making with respect to the process for determining the existence of threats to international peace and security, with respect to sanctioning when such threats to international peace and security exist. These are the questions we hope we would get answers to in the course of this afternoon. With that, I would like now to hand over the mic to His Excellency, the Special Representative of the Secretary General and Head of the United Nations Office to the African Union. You have the floor, please.
Thank you very much. Bravo. Thank you so much, my dear brother and friend, Dr. Salmon Derso, for your absolutely insightful introduction to this critical topic before us. I, I will be doing something that I don't like much, that is to take a few quotes, but I just wanted to say how much this conversation is timely. I don't know how many of you listened to the Secretary General's speech or remarks to the General Assembly just yesterday on the priorities for 2024. And I'm sure the distinguished ambassadors and PRs who are on this panel will be intervening, sooner. We're in the room, we're in the G hall, and they will certainly be commenting also on giving their impression, sharing their impressions from what we heard yesterday by the SG. And I will really strongly encourage each and everyone to take a look and to really ponder the words of the SG shared with the world yesterday. For my part, allow me to start by borrowing his voice on why we are having this important conversation. The SG reminded us that our organization was founded on the pursuit of peace, and that peace is our raison d'etre. Yet, he added, as I scan the landscape of today's world, the one thing missing most dramatically is peace. Peace, he eloquently expressed, is the missing piece in our world today. And in his call to action, the SG argues that our obligation is to act together for peace in all its dimensions. I'd like to emphasize the words all its dimensions. And that's why I'm so pleased to come right after you, Dr. Salmon, for the expose you just made was indeed holistic in its nature, because we will be wrong to focus, to have a conversation on Security Council reform, believing rightly that it deals with peace and security, and not keep in mind the overall picture. Because the challenges we face are indeed interconnected. Our response must therefore be holistic. And we are grateful for the SG, and thank you again, Dr. Solomon, for stressing that point, for providing us with forward-looking and thought-provoking policy briefs, 11 in total so far, to facilitate the intergovernmental negotiation process on how to agree on our common agenda at the Summit of the Future next September. Now, as you task us to reflect on this important topic. I ask myself, why do we need a summit of the future in the first place? And I think we have to acknowledge that our common journey has come to a crossroad. There is a fork in the road. And so we need to pause a bit, to take a deep breath, and to reflect on what has gone wrong, what have we missed in the process, and on how best we could carry on this journey. On a more informed basis. And clearly the cascade of challenges that we are before us are detrimental, have detrimental implications. And these are at both global, national, regional, and local levels. And as you also stressed, dear Solomon, one region in particular, Africa, is really at the receiving end and totally unprepared to cope with the multifaceted shocks. And my elder, Ambassador Takeda was right, he's right, still right, to make the point that this is certainly the place where any external shock has deep repercussions that we need to take fully into account. Now, we can have a long conversation on the reason why we need a summit of the future, but definitely we have to acknowledge that the current multilateral system has served the world well. But it is definitely confronted with significant fault lines that will need to be addressed head on. And that's why we cannot do away with altogether with what we have as we try to build anew. We'll certainly have to look at what we have and move from there. But there is no doubt whatsoever that should there be a reform of the Security Council, and regardless of the option that will be on the table, there is no question about the fact that Africa has to be part of any reform, any expanded Security Council. This will be a just course of action, correcting an historical injustice, as we all agree. And as we and as long as indeed major reforms on, including on the issue of the veto power will be on the table, it would be simply fair to say that any new member of this body must be also granted that same prerogatives and powers. And to answer some of the questions that you put before us. So I will not be commenting on the options. I will leave it to member state. I think it would be a better, safer for me not to enter into commenting the Zurich consensus. I will simply offer that as much as the geographic representation of the continent is a very sound position, and actually it poses an issue to the international community because it's a challenge to reform, to do business differently, to agree to the notion of representation that is beyond Article 23 of the current UN Charter. The question is there any readiness to do that? And therefore, it will be a matter for the continent to reflect on, if not, if that reform does not address the issue of geographical representation, what else? What do we do? Should the reform of the council, its expansion into two categories, be blocked? As there will be no agreement on changing the provisions of Article 23, or should it be done differently? I think those are some of the questions that we can generally ask. And these questions resonate today a bit more than before, because, as you said, the veto power is no longer that popular. I think we have seen the negative implications of the veto right. And therefore, if in a world where the aspirations for more democratic representation and equality between member states, within countries and between countries, one could simply aspire and hope that even if this right that is today totally anachronistic, because it was agreed upon at a time that was absolutely exceptional in the human history, coming out of a devastating war in 1945. I think the world has evolved, and today it's fair to ask the question whether this is something that we still want to, support. Is it a reflection of the equality that we all aspire to? So therefore, even if we cannot get rid of it, isn't it a time to indeed condition its use, as the G has started off, but to ensure that it is done in a way that is agreed upon by consensus, so that it is not seen by others as a loss of any kind of power. So I will leave this conversation at this point, but simply to say that in any configuration, in any option, Africa has indeed to be fully represented on the basis of its request for fair representation and equal representation. That in the spirit of the quest for equality, all members should be equal in a new configuration, and that moving forward, if the desire of member state is so get rid of this glowingly anachronistic, power that goes against the very foundation and the values that, that are the bedrock of multilateralism, on the principle of solidarity, of equality, of respect, and universality. Maybe member states will be willing to condition the use of that power, but these are questions that member states will certainly bring more clarity. I will leave it there.
Thank you so much for those very insightful reflections, particularly anchoring on what the Secretary General both in terms of the policy briefs that he published, but also his sobering remark yesterday to the General Assembly about the 2024 priorities of the UN. But I think those reflections indeed highlight from your side um, one key point, key line that you said, which I think would be interesting to see, to reflect on, is what is the ideal in an ideal world? What kind of reform would be possible? Would be, consistent with those values that, as you rightly said, are the bedrock of multilateralism. In an ideal world. Uh, and realistically, what is possible is the other aspect of the question. So, your point, we can't do away with what we have. So, starting from scratch is not in the realm of uh, the realistic, the possible, right? So, what we can, therefore, what we are and will be left with is how to, and of course, we can't also continue with what we have. We can't do away with it, neither can we continue with it as it is. All right. And it is in between this that we need to find options, since we are discussing about options today. So thank you very much for also adding those additional perspectives and points, the issue about representation and legitimacy, the issue about the question of, the validity of Africa's quest for representation in the UN Security Council. And that leads me to now give the floor to Her Excellency Ambassador Rebecca, permanent representative of Uganda to the African Union and UNECA, whose country is also a member of the Committee of 10 of the African Union, responsible for advocating on Africa's position on the reform of the UN Security Council. Ambassador Rebecca, I would like to thank you personally for joining us this afternoon. I know that this is an extremely busy time for you and your peers in the African Union, but this engagement, you found it to be of also use for you and for all of us here. So I personally, and on behalf of Amani Africa and all our partners, wish to thank you for your presence and sharing your thoughts. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Solomon. And I would like to thank all the panelists. Your Excellencies, allow me to stand on the existing protocols respectfully. When Solomon invited me, I had some kind of conversation with him. I asked him, what else can we say? Do we have something else to say? But I would like to just restate that we'll continue speaking until we are listened to. It may be the same thing, we may change the approach, but it remains the same because we have a common African position. Dr. Solomon, allow me to thank you for inviting me. And really, it's important that even as we get into the summit, we have some thoughts around the house, because the people we have here make very useful contributions. You've asked us to share the perspective on UN reform in the light of the Summit of the Future, but also not forgetting the Secretary General's new agenda of peace. We can only say that the debate comes at a very challenging time in the conduct of international relations. The current geopolitical situation in the world calls for early reform in the Security Council. Let me get to Africa. Almost every part of the continent is either undergoing or has undergone some kind of conflict in the last 20 years. Today, we estimate that almost 85% of Africans live in or close to conflict in a country. All the neighboring countries around those countries. The security challenges on the continent are diverse in nature and range from terrorism and violent extremism, climate change as the new challenge again, illicit small arms and light weapons, unemployment, armed conflict, to mention but a few. These challenges continue to threaten the security and well-being of human societies and do constrain the development of our continent, Africa. We'll again repeat that in 1945, when the Charter of UN was being adopted at San Francisco, no single African country was admitted to the UN Security Council. This historical injustice is what the Assembly of the Heads of State of Africa sought to cure through the adoption of the Zwelini consensus. It should not be forgotten. Almost 60% of the agenda of the UN Security Council composed of the situation on the continent Africa. The objective of the consensus, therefore, is to enable Africa to fully be represented in all the decision-making organs of the AU, particularly the UN Security Council, which is the principal decision-making organ of the UN in matters relating to peace and security. We strongly support the common African position, especially the Africans' representation in the permanent category, as the only continent that is not yet represented. We must maintain the demand of all rights and privileges enjoyed by the P5, including the veto powers. The limited representation of Africa in the UN Security Council has contributed to the limited success of conflict resolution in the continent. Today, we have a growing momentum where Africa countries demanding for UN peacekeeping missions to exit, given the different context specific challenges that these missions have encountered. Not that they are not doing their part, but the context seems to have changed. The question is, what do we foresee in the future on the UN Security Council to look like? We think we need the rights and the prerogative of the P5. We see a future where the peace support operations are well facilitated and with full access to UN access contributions. We execute our mandate. If we don't have the access contribution, how do you expect us to execute the mandate? We also see a future where the peace and security challenges are more fairly and objectively dealt with. We also see a future where there's balance in decision-making and in the implementation of the said decision. Notwithstanding the limited progress in this matter, we must continue to work towards a stronger partnership with partners to support the peace support operations in Africa. On the issues generally hindering the reforms, we have this report. We think we need to have more engagements, especially with the P5, because they have the veto power, whereas they have all, in principle, expressed support for the reforms and expansion of the permanent category Some have been categorical that there should not be any expansion of the veto or to any prospective new permanent members. The positive part is that all the P5s in our discussions are positive, but there are some areas that we still differ. We therefore need to engage more with the P5 and with the other groups that have divergent views from the African common position. The debate on who will take which seat to us is still diversionary, premature, and it is only aimed at distracting us from our objective. In our view, the Assembly of Heads of State and Government will elaborate criterion of on filling these positions if we are given. In Africa, you do not begin getting which part animal you will take when you are still going to hunt. We believe that when the animal is home, it is when we begin discussing on who takes which part. And we have a very good president in doing that. Further, on the question of what options can be considered by us. In responding to this question, I also wish to comment on the idea of text-based negotiation. The common African position is a bare minimum position agreed by the heads of states and government of the African Union. Negotiation by their nature imply to give and take process. What shall we give and what shall we have in return? Which is the position that has been at the moment as we do our negotiation. We insist it's premature to engage in the text-based negotiation. Text-based negotiation will only be entertained after all the UN member states have reached the consensus on all the 5 clusters and agreed framework. However, we support the call for the Secretariat to develop the revised framework document where member states that did not populate the 1st July 2015 document would be encouraged to do so as a way to reduce the areas of divergences. Some have suggested that Africa's insistence on the veto power will delay the reform and African representation. What would be the use of joining the permanent category without the full veto power and all the rights that the veto, the P5 have? The veto power is held by small groups of countries. What would Africa have achieved after all these many years? There have been calls for engagement which should be enhanced, especially by the C10 in the process of negotiation. It is not yet clear what constitutes the engagements which are enhanced and how it will contribute to the promotion of the African common position. In our view, there's no harm in engaging further and further, as long as it doesn't in any way infringe upon the underlying principles of the strong African position, which is common to all of us. Your Excellencies, in closing, it is important for Africa to remain cohesive in the way that we speak with one voice, and we insist on that. We need a meeting of purpose, meeting of minds, and we also insist that we don't represent ourselves like the leaders, but we represent over 1.3 billion Africans. That's the number that must be looked into. And therefore, if in 1945, situation at that time made it possible for Africa to be closed out. This has changed with all these number of population and the conflict in the continent. Having said that, I want to thank you for the kind attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your insightful reflections and remarks, which underscore and indeed expose the state of uh, thinking and discussion within the African Union, particularly in the context of the work of the Committee of 10 heads of state and government responsible for advocating the African position. And indeed, the latest meeting that was held in uh, Malabo, yeah, Equatorial Guinea, outside actually. Yes, as you mentioned, one of the agreement is for an enhanced engagement uh, by the C10 on this issue, with the understanding of uh, finding more buy-in for the position that is put forward on the part of Africa. Particularly, that resonates, of course, with the point that the SRSG made as well on the question of representation, which relates to the historical injustice that you highlighted in that made the exclusion of Africa possible in 1945, and the change that now requires us to rethink about the continuity of this status of Africa not being in the Security Council. Um, other permanent, other permanent, the great gentleman that SRSG is. Thank you very much. So I mean, the point questions have been asked by Ambassador about questions that is posed to Africa. Who is going to represent you if there is going to be a seat allocated to Africa? She had asked questions about that, whether that is really. I think she gave a very, you know, a very rich African wisdom, right? Before you go for hunting, uh, you don't negotiate about which part of the animal to be hunted you are going to take before the hunt is finished. It's only after the hunt is done, the animal is in-house, as she rightly said, then you discuss about which part, who takes which part. And that is very interesting to think about and reflect on. But I'm not really sure, Ambassador, if what that means is in the event that there is going to be reform processes short of this idea that is put forward, uh, would it mean that Africa wouldn't at all engage, or would Africa actually would say we would continue to work on achieving what we are asking for, while at the same time possibly whatever incremental change that happened, we would also accept. You made reference to, for example, how peace and security issues are addressed has to be adjusted. You know, the way it is handled, peace and security issues are handled. You said it has to be dealt with objectively, fairly. You know, that seems to also suggest that there is a possibility for other forms of, arrangements and reforms, including, for example, the whole question of pen holdership that is part of the decision making arrangement in the UN Security Council. Um, we will now move to our next speaker, and then open the floor for discussion and conversation. Our next speaker is His Excellency Ambassador Takada Alamu. Um, who was the permanent representative of Ethiopia to the UN when Ethiopia was a non-permanent member of the UN Security Council. And he was also a state minister of foreign affairs of Ethiopia. Ambassador Takada is on his own right a very giant intellectual who have been critical to thinking about regional integration, peace and security order, including the Horn of Africa. And he has been following African Union for since the beginning. So we are very happy to have you, Ambassador, to share with us from your rich experience and expertise. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Dr. Solomon. Let me say by way of preface that I took the assignment very seriously. And I have prepared a statement, and I intend to stick to it as much as possible, because I make arguments, I take positions which might not be welcomed by some. I try to be as frank as possible. Now, the reason why I do this is because, of course, we are focusing on the reform for the Security Council, and I focus on the Africa position. And then I felt that this time around, the topic has to be handled very, very seriously, because it has to be seen in light of the upcoming the summit of the future and outcome document, the pact for the future. And I feel it is absolutely critical that the Africa position be taken very seriously. Therefore, it is very, very important to make the argument as logically as possible, in a realistic manner, in an honest manner. That I believe is absolutely critical. Now, the reform of the Security Council usually looked at in two ways. On one hand, there are parties that believe it's a useless exercise, a useless effort. Some have said it is a worthless quagmire. On the other hand, there are those who feel that it is a very serious matter, and it has to be handled very seriously. But they seem to understate the problems involved, the obstacles involved. It is absolutely critical to consider both. Now, my own position is yes, it is it's not going to be easy. The reform of the Security Council, as I explain later in the body of my statement, though it's not easy, but on the other hand, on the part of Africa, it's absolutely critical that we make the argument so that in the pact, in the outcome document for the future summit, in the pact, that the position of Africa is taken very seriously. Now, in the new agenda for peace, which is essentially a sequel to the 1992 agenda for peace, the Secretary General makes it all apparent how much the world has changed in the last 32 years. It might not be proper to relish the 90s, because on the other hand, it was a period when we were marginalized. Africa was marginalized. And this gives me an opportunity to really express appreciation to Japan, which realized in the early 90s how much Africa was marginalized. And that was the beginning of ICAD, the Tokyo International Conference on African Development. It was begun by Japan. And coincidentally, they happened to be a partner for this meeting. I had the opportunity to participate in that first conference. Now, therefore, the 90s, no doubt, should not be adulated. As I said, we were marginalized at that time. You understand what is involved behind that. The competition between the two major powers was over. The Soviet Union was defeated. The Soviet Union collapsed. And essentially, Africa was taken for granted. That was what happened in the 90s. But on the other hand, the Security Council was performing much better than today at that time. Since then, it was downhill, essentially. And we still are in that period. Now, the Secretary General in that document makes the following point, which I regard as very, very important, and I quote: building this new multilateralism must start with action for peace, not only because war undermines progress across all agendas, but because it was a pursuit of peace that in 1945 united states around the need for global governance and international organization, end of quotation. Now, as was said earlier, and as has now become universally accepted, the Security Council has become dysfunctional. Because even earlier, the Council has never been fully functional. It is to be recalled that at the height of the Cold War, efforts avert crisis leading to war was essentially handled by the two superpowers. One recalls October 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis. Third parties, including the United Nations, were essentially spectators. Therefore, even during the earlier period, it's not true that the Security Council was fully functional, but it was performing much better. Now, as you know, the philosophy and the principle underpinning the special mandate of the Security Council as it relates to the permanent five and the veto power was that they could also contribute to international peace, to international as well as regional peace and security. And they did contribute a lot in that regard earlier. Now the question is, does this continue to be the case at the present time? Does the special privilege the permanent five continue to have help maintain peace and for more security? Or is it the case that what we see is in fact the opposite, in that the permanent five, far from contributing to peace and security, have indeed become source of the problem? It is thus impossible to deny that there is a clear anomaly here, which would have called for action if such action were to lead to the resolution of the problem. But under the circumstances, the hands of member states are tied by Article 108 and 109 of the Charter of the United Nations, which make it impossible to amend the Charter without the consent of the permanent five. Article 109 allows the convening of a general conference by 2/3 vote of members for reviewing the present charter. But as in Article 108, any change of the present charter requires agreement by all members of the Security Council. What's aggravating the whole problem is the fact that those from whom so much is expected for peace are seen to do little, and in fact have become for peace. In what is becoming very alarming, the situation continues to deteriorate. One does not need to talk about what is happening at the present time. And global goods are becoming bereft of reliable custodian. In the meantime, we realize that efforts are continuing at the United Nations by various groups, among whom are the Africa Group, the group calling itself the United for Consensus, and the Group of Four, to promote their interests by securing positions in the Security Council that would allow them to have better voice. At the end of the day, for most, unlike the Africa Group, the interest in having greater voice in the Security Council is in most cases a matter of privilege. There is also, no doubt, the possible potential reform of the Security Council has drawn the attention of members of the Security Council, particularly the permanent five, regarding the implications of the expansion of the membership of the Council, geopolitical matters in the balance of forces. Consequently, whatever is said by member states, particularly by the permanent five, without exception, what's most prominent behind those statements is consideration of national interest. That is bound to make it very difficult for groups such as the Africa Group, for whom the reform of the Security Council is indeed great importance to make real progress. This is going to require Africa to be wise, realistic, and practical as it pursues its interest via the Reform Council. It might indeed be very fruitful. Consider how Africa could take advantage of the situation if it found itself within the Security Council that has undergone reform. Well, it all depends, among other things, on the kind of reform that the Council might have gone through. With the situation of the Security Council remaining the same, with the same permanent five wielding the same power, it is very difficult to imagine that there would be much difference in the situation from what it is today. But this perhaps deserves closer look. How far can Africa go with the Izuluwi consensus? Izuluwi consensus, as has already been said, is a common Africa position on the reform of the Security Council adopted in 2005. It calls for democratizing the Council and expanding its membership. The specific demand, the council and expanding its membership. It calls for democratizing the Council and expanding its membership. The specific demand on the part of Africa is for 2 permanent seats and additional 3 non-permanent ones. It is perfectly possible and legitimate to raise issues surrounding matters regarding the implementation of the demand, provided that the initial obstacle is overcome. That is, there is a consensus on accepting the Africa demand. What is important, first of all, is the acceptance of the legitimacy of the demand by Africa in light of its democratic nature and also given the totally dysfunctional nature of the Security Council present, with little prospect that it would improve in the future. When judging the Africa request, it's very critical to consider how much effectively the present Council has assisted Africa to resolve its security challenge. The mantra or the phrase African solutions to Africa problems may not be fully in line with the principle of universality that underlines the very existence of the United Nations. On the other hand, it might also reflect the frustration of Africa at the double standard Africa often faces in the international community. That cannot be ruled out. What all this seem to suggest is that the outcome document of the summit of the future, the pact for the future, if it is to be taken seriously, would need to take seriously the African common position. It wouldn't help to focus on the potential weakness of the common Africa position, which can be rectified in due course. Obviously, as already indicated, the likelihood that the permanent five would allow amendments of the charter proceed despite the creation of the contrary is nearly zero. They are not going to change their position. Under these circumstances, one course of action that should be considered is the convening under Article 109 of the Charter of the General Conference, the members of the United Nations, for the purposes of reviewing the Charter. This can be done at a date and place to be fixed by a two-thirds vote of members of the General Assembly and by a vote of any 9 members of the Security Council. And then paragraph 2 of the same article 109 requires the recommendation of the conference to be ratified by all permanent members of the Security Council. It seems no matter what we do, it appears that the hands of Africa would continue to be tied as far as finding a way out of the predicament. The advantage the review conference is it might help hold the feet of the permanent 5 of the fire, thus making it difficult for them to pretend to be supportive of the reform without really trying to. All the same, it might be useful to trace of the General Conference may need to be pursued seriously, including with the view to ensuring the idea to be included as part of the outcome in the pact for the future. However, there is a need for an important caveat here. What Africa needs to consider very seriously is what it needs to do to sort out its internal problems, both at individual country level as well as at the multilateral level, both at continental and regional levels. Let us be honest, we are not in good shape in all those levels. It is unlikely outside world take us seriously unless a major effort is made to change this situation for the better. Our demand, our wishes, and the recommendations will be taken seriously when we succeed in pursuing and putting our house in order. This includes putting our money where our mouth is as far as commitment, common positions on this matters, as the ambassador said earlier. There is a lot of work that needs to be carried out in this regard. There is no other way to ensure that our interests are promoted. Thank you.
From Ambassador Takada's presentation, the richness and depth of his insights and his understanding also of international relations, the implications of the provisions of the UN Charter, the positionality of the permanent 5 members of the UN Security Council is in full display. And one very, there are certain adjectives that he used as far as how to pursue African common position is concerned, that Africa has to be wise, practical, and realistic. He also made a very compelling case for the use of the General Convention of the United Nations under Article 109 of the UN Charter. as a very powerful avenue uh, in order to make the permanent five, if you like, relent and be accommodative in Africa's demand for um, the democratization of the UN Security Council. And where he ended is also profound, where he said, we also need a reform, not just at the level of the multilateral level in the UN internationally. We also need reform at our own level continentally. That it's only when we do those together that we would be in a better, more effective position as Africa to play and assume our responsibility effectively to contribute to global public goods. I think with that, we would now open the this is time for some discussions with for questions and answers and reflections. When he started, Ambassador Takada threatened that some of the stuff that he may say may trigger some pushback or may not settle well with some. I'm not really sure if that's the case, but let's test it. By the way, there are English to French translations, so those of you who would like to okay. Ambassador Petro Mona.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much to Amani Africa and the AU mission of Japan, the Japan mission to the AU for organizing this event. Indeed, quoting a little bit Ambassador Rebecca, it's not the first time that we talk about it, but I would subscribe to the fact that we need to continue talking about it. Things have to change, and this is the second preface about what I'm going to say, slightly inspired also by what Ambassador Takeda said. So the preface is Switzerland is very much committed to a reform of the Security Council. We do recognize that Africa has not only a mathematical, but a historical, cultural, political claim to be better represented on the council. And therefore, I would subscribe also to what has been said before. The slight divergence that I have, and again, I hope that Ambassador Rebecca will not misunderstand me, is with regard to the issue of veto power. And not so much, it's not our position to say that should we ever reach the point where there is a consensus, and I appreciate reminder of Article 108 and 109, which indeed is often forgotten that the P5 don't only yield the veto power in the council itself, but actually also yield the de facto or the jure veto power on any changes and modification or amendments to the charter. I think this is important to keep in mind. But for me, the question, and this is where I pick up what Ambassador Takeda said, is really about, should not our focus be at least equally distributed between a numerical reform and the debate on, are there any reforms, any discussions on, maybe it sounds naive, but addressing some of the dysfunctionality Ambassador Takeda mentioned of the council itself. To be provocative, I'm not sure that simply by adding numbers to the council, we will fix some of the underlying problems the council is facing at the moment. We have to acknowledge that at the moment we live in a situation where a veto power, a nuclear power, has almost to the day 2 years ago militarily aggressed a neighboring sovereign country. We have to acknowledge that the Council has struggled and continues to struggle tremendously in finding a common language of addressing what is happening in Israel and in Gaza and Palestine. We also have to acknowledge that the Council struggles enormously in making any impact on what is happening in a neighboring country of Ethiopia, for example, in Sudan. And these are just 3 examples. But I think that the question of the reform should not be limited to numbers. And again, please keep in mind my preface. I'm not questioning the Africa's position on this. But we should really try to find more platforms, more common ground, where countries can come together, and partners and civil society and academia, to also think more about substantive reform. Are there mechanisms that can render Council more accountable, more coherent, and more transparent? And I use these 3 words because there is the ACT group in New York trying to do exactly that. Small increments, as the one that Solomon you mentioned about, if there is a veto being used, they have to now defend it in the General Assembly. But I think we have to look at also how can we change the current downward spiral that the Council seems to be stuck in. And don't get me wrong, there have been important decisions taken by the Council in recent time. I think the mission to Haiti, let's see how it's going to be implemented. It's an important decision, also decision 2719, with all the rumors around it. I think it's at least a step in the right direction. But I think this is something that we have to keep in mind. And also on the veto power itself, I just looked at the numbers, and I don't know, I think by August 2023, the veto power was used roughly 270 times in the history of the Council. Almost half of the time it was used by Russia and previously the Soviet Union. 1 additional third by the US, and only the remaining 1/6 by the Standing Order UK, China, and France. I think this also shows you a little bit the geopolitical context in which we're in. At the same time, I think countries from Africa, from Europe, from any continent, if we continue to join our voices, use platforms such as the Summit of the Future, but the General Assembly and other platforms, to continuously point to certain injustices, certain needs to reform, I do believe that changes are possible. Sometimes I feel that we are shying too fast back from the superpower that are the P5. And indeed, on paper, they yield a lot of power. But numbers can mean strength as well. But for that, we need to have platforms where we can join our voices and really try to make a difference. And I think the difference is made pointing to issues with numeric representation, but also with regards to institutional reforms that, in my view, also have to be addressed in the Council and in the broader multilateral system. Not so much a question, more of a comment, but thank you very much for giving me the floor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Petro, on the question of would adding numbers solve the dysfunction of the UN Security Council, and what more reform or change do we need to put in place? This RSG is, since I am not seeing any further hands, okay, all right. So I'll come to you, RSG. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Solomon, and I want to thank the panelists for such insightful reflections. I wanted to direct my question to Ambassador Rebecca, because you spoke on the point of the UN peacekeeping missions in the continent, and if I heard you well, in a way you sounded like you're saying we are coming to the end of the UN peacekeeping missions as we know them today, because they haven't been efficient. And I wanted to know from you, of course, we closed the year last year with the resolution 2719, which was very positive, and in a way a recognition of the contributions that Africa has made and continues to make when it comes to peace support operations. And my question is now, Africa is also a member of the UN in a sense. So do you see that there will be efforts to reform the UN peacekeeping mission as we know them, both from the doctrine side, but also on the mandate? Or we go rather to say, as far as Africa is concerned, we're going to be rather dealing with peace operations by ourselves? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we have Cameroon here. Dr. Jean. Thank you.
Jean Juncken, diplomate, ambassade du Cameroun. Je voudrais associer ma voix à celle des préopinants pour féliciter Amani Africa pour l'organisation réussie de cette importante table ronde qui nous éclaire sur la réforme du système multilatéral, celle du Conseil de sécurité, les enjeux du sommet pour le futur. Est-ce que l'Afrique... Alors, à l'adresse de l'ambassadeur parfait, représentant spécial du secrétaire général des Nations Unies, je voudrais me féliciter de la présentation qu'il fait et me féliciter de l'engagement du secrétaire général des Nations Unies, de son nation, en vue d'une organisation mondiale des nations. Et vous avez évoqué aujourd'hui, comme au cours d'une autre conférence il y a quelque temps, son programme pour la paix et surtout son rapport sur le financement des opérations de soutien à la paix et le concept que vous avez mis en avant. Je l'avais beaucoup aimé. Vous avez parlé d'indivisibilité, la sécurité collective. Alors, comment est-ce que l'indivisibilité de la sécurité collective, qui est si chère, des Nations Unies, aura occupé sa place dans le cadre du sommet pour le futur? Est-ce que l'Afrique peut espérer avoir une chance de voir sa cause prospérer cette fois-là? Voyez-vous, l'Union africaine pratiquement épuisée. Tous les cadres qui étaient à sa disposition pour obtenir du Conseil de sécurité des Nations Unies une résolution sur le financement durable, prévisible et évident des opérations de soutien à la paix menées par l'Union africaine, le financement à partir des contributions statutaires des Nations Unies. Mais, hélas, nous avons obtenu une résolution le 21 décembre qui peut être présentée comme un verre à moitié vide ou à moitié plein. Toujours est-il qu'on parle d'un financement à hauteur de 15%. Les 25% restent problématiques. Donc, d'où ma question principale. Oui, à l'adresse de son excellence, Madame Ambassadeur Rebecca, je voudrais féliciter à travers elle, son pays, l'Ouganda, pour son leadership au sein de l'IGAD, réunion tenue à Kampala, son leadership à la tête de la Commission économique des Nations Unies pour l'Afrique, pour son leadership au sein du Conseil de paix et de sécurité de l'Union africaine. C'est Madame l'ambassadeur Rebecca qui a conduit la délégation du Conseil de paix et de sécurité aux consultations annuelles entre le Conseil de paix et de sécurité et le Comité politique de sécurité de l'Union européenne, qui a planché sur un nombre de questions.
that has
Et sur
actually
certaines questions,
raised
on
a
est
lot of questions,
resté
and because of
divisé.
those questions, we have
Pendant que le
remained
sommet pour le
divided.
futur approche,
And as the
il est question de
summit is
savoir
approaching,
si on ne va pas
we are
reconduire
trying to
les
know
mêmes
if we're not
divisions.
going to
Ça m'amène surtout,
encounter
mais
the
la
same
question
divisions.
principale est de savoir,
So my
pour
again, my
l'Ouganda
question
qui a eu la
is to
fierté et
know for
l'honneur
Uganda that
d'accueillir le
has
sommet
had this
du monde des non-alignés,
proud and honor to
il y a
welcome this
il y a
summit.
quelques mois.
It's
Quels sont
it's been
les
a few months.
véritables
What
enseignements, les
are
véritables leçons,
lessons
les
that
véritables
are
conclusions
very
de
concrete
ce
or
sommet du
conclusions
moment des
from that
non-alignés
summit
par
since
rapport,
it
n'est-ce pas,
happened?
à la recherche d'un meilleur positionnement de
As we're
l'Afrique
finding a
dans
very good
l'agenda
position of Africa in this
mondial,
agenda,
en particulier l'agenda de la paix et de la
from
sécurité.
actually the peace
Ce
agenda
qui
and
m'amène à poser
security.
cette question,
This is the reason
c'est
why
le
I'm
fait
asking this
que
question.
face
And
à l'ordre
when it
international
comes to the
ancien
war,
qui est favorable aux pays développés
order
et défavorable aux pays en
that was
développement,
favoring
eh bien,
countries that
c'est un
were
moment
actually
d'ensemble
developed, it's
des
actually
pays
a
en
moment
développement qui a mené
together of countries
un certain
that
nombre
are
de
developing
rencontres
that has brought
qui
a
a fait
certain number
parler
of
d'un certain
reform
nombre de nouvelles ordres économiques
that
internationales.
has brought also
Dans quelle
another new
mesure
world
les conclusions du
economic
sommet
one,
du monde aligné ou
and
sans
that
être
has also
plus
helped
Chine
us
devrait
during the
contribuer
summit
à un
to
positionnement,
contribute again
oui, à une
to
meilleure
this
défense
position or the
des
best
intérêts de
defense
l'Afrique,
on
des pays en
the
développement,
interest
dans
of
le cadre de
Africa
l'essai de
and
réforme
countries in
du
terms of
système international.
development,
Enfin,
and of
je
course
me félicite
international
de
system. At the end, I'm
contribution
also
très proactive,
congratulating
très
myself
courageuse
for the
de son
contribution,
Excellence
and of
qui
course
est là
His
les mots
Excellency Dr.
partage son
Alemu, who is
expérience
sharing his
d'ancien
experiences
représentant permanent
as has been
au
an older
Conseil de sécurité des
representative
Nations Unies.
from
Merci
that Council
que vous
of
avez fait.
UN. Thank you for the points
Le
that
recours à l'article
you've put
107 de
in
la
place
Charte pour convoquer une conférence
so that
à
we can
l'effet
have
d'une
a
révision
very effective
éventuelle.
conference
Merci
as
pour
we are trying
l'accent
to
que vous avez
revise
mis
again
la
the
nécessité
points
pour
that
les
have
pays
been
africains d'avoir une approche réaliste,
detected,
d'être intelligent,
and everything
d'être
that you've talked
politique.
about so that we
Mais
can be more
en quoi
intelligent.
consiste
But
ce
again,
pragmatisme,
what
cette
are the
intelligence,
places
si
or the
tant est que,
points that you've like? What are
après que le Conseil de
the
paix et de
importance of the points
sécurité,
that
après que
you've
la
mentioned?
conférence des
Because
chefs d'État
after
de
the
l'Union
Council
africaine
of Security
a adopté un
and
document de consensus
heads of
africain
African
pour le
Union
financement durable, prévisible
finishing to
et
adopt this
adéquat
document
des opérations de soutien à la paix
for
menées par
operations
l'Afrique,
of
financement à
peace
partir
support
des contributions
and of course
statutaires
other
des Nations Unies.
contributions
Après que cette question a été discutée,
because after
lors des
this has been
consultations
discussed
annuelles entre le Conseil de paix et de sécurité de l'Union
between the
africaine et
Council
le
of
Conseil de sécurité des Nations Unies,
Security
après que
of
cette question
African
a été
Union and the
discutée
UN,
entre le
after this
président de la
question has
Commission de l'Union
been
africaine
discussed
et le
between the
secrétaire
two
général des Nations
presidents
Unies,
or the
après
president
la
of African
convergence
Union
entre
and the Secretary
le
of,
document de consensus africain
UN,
et le rapport du secrétaire
and
général
of
des
course
Nations
their
Unies
report,
mettant en avant une
bringing
divisivité
together the issue of
définitive,
not being
on est
divided,
arrivé à un
we have
résultat. Et
we have
enfin,
come to
sur la
these
base de votre
results. And
expérience,
from your
membre du
experiences,
Conseil de sécurité des Nations
the
Unies,
lack of
comment est-ce qu'en
council
l'espace depuis
or the lack
1975,
of
on n'a
actions,
jamais pu
we
revoir
have never
la question
been
du
able to
penholder,
see
la question
again the question
qui porte préjudice gravement à l'Union
of
africaine
punishments
par rapport, n'est-ce pas, au contenu des résolutions, même si les
to
efforts du Conseil de paix et
atrocities,
de sécurité et l'interaction avec les A3,
and of
au sein
course
du Conseil de
interactions with
sécurité des Nations
A3,
Unies,
and of
ne
course
parviennent pas encore
this is not
à briser
being
des résistances qui
there
restent
observed.
très fortes. Je vous remercie.
So I wanted you to talk about these points. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. John, for your contribution, also bringing in your own experience from your participation in the Peace and Security Council, as well as its engagement with international, the UN Security Council, as well as the European Peace and Security Committee. Let me get back to, yes, ladies, let me come to you and then I'll come back.
Okay,
Please,
I
Theo.
think joining in moderation just to bring forward a question that was forwarded from our virtual audience. So it's more of a question to ask, to propose something, and then see what the panel's reflection around that would be. So it's Hannah Rader from the Development Reimagined organization. So she points out that the veto is in principle not the major problem, but instead the entire concept of permanence should be abolished. She voices that their view is there is no country in the world in the world that deserves a permanent seat. Veto-based decision-making on behalf of others, as the Security Council does, should be earned, and criteria for responsibility and capability um, transparently should be demonstrated. So therefore, we have a reimagination of a structure for a Security Council that would see all 15 seats being made temporary for periods of 5 years to provide more continuity, of course, with wide, non-regional and open competition for each seat, alongside clear monitored restrictions on lobbying expenses and two-term limits within a cycle of 30 years to reward excellence while avoiding domination. So this is their proposal.
Okay. Thank you very much for that imagination, pushing the boundaries, even outside of the box, so to speak. Thank you, Hannah, for your great question. So let me come back to the panelists for their reflections on the really very rich contributions from the floor. SRC, you have been itching to.
No.
I'm kidding.
No.
But I know that you have insightful reflections on this question. So please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Solomon. And really, it's a privilege to be sharing this panel with such eloquent and brilliant panelists and experience. And really, but yes, it's Rebecca, listening to you articulating the African position puts me in a position of comfort. So we don't have to fight for something that member states know well how to articulate. And I envy the position of my dear brother, my elder, Ambassador Takeda, because he has no longer any string that would prevent him from, being called, really pushing the conversation to its limits where he belongs. And really thank you for that. And I want to thank Anna for her question as well, because this is indeed helping us to think outside of the box. And this is the kind of thinking that I fully agree with Pietro and others that we need to continue this conversation with think tanks, and because it belongs to the world. I mean, Article 24 is clear. Any member state on the council is acting not only on behalf of its own national interests, but on behalf of the rest of the world. And this is the foundation for member states to agree that they will be entrusting a limited number of member states with so much power that affects their lives. So it is significant. And Ambassador Tekela, that's why I'm so pleased that you took time to really raise those very critical questions. And indeed, in my own preparation for this meeting, indeed, I mean, 109 is there for us to ponder. Where are we going with this? But the good news, if any, is that we cannot deny the fact that there is indeed, as is often the case on the occasion of major reform processes within the United Nations, we cannot ignore the momentum that is building, that has been building over the years, and the very strong public pronouncement from all P5s that they want the council to be reformed. This is not something that we should, somehow downplay. It is significant that the council members understand the chorus, the calls from the floor, from member state at large, for people at large who are questioning, and rightly so, sometimes, the decision of the council. But as I said, 75 on, the council have served this world. We have avoided major confrontations. The world, as avoided a third world war. That's not a small feat. So we cannot take it for granted that this is not. But then we indeed have to be worried with all the developments we are seeing, including those who have spent time in disarmament. The prospect of us being closer to midnight, simply unthinkable as we speak today. We've never thought that we would be finding ourselves in a position where the option of using those absolutely deadly weapons will be on the table. Here we are. So that's precisely why the SG is indeed pushing the envelope and urging member states to reflect. And the only way we can do this rightly is to go back to the fundamentals. And the fundamentals are here for us to reflect on. It's in the name of we the people. This is our common humanity. There can be any prerogative that would be given to any one of us that would undermine this common fate of this humanity. This is the fundamental. That's why the SG is calling us back to universality. It's calling us back to respect. It's calling back to solidarity. These fundamental principles and the equity that would make sure that as we reflect on these important matters, we take it seriously, that the Council, by the way, can no longer be faithful to Article 23 to Article 24 of the Charter if it does not open up and if it does not indeed ensure that it is becoming by its own decisions more legitimate and more inclusive. And that's why, Pietro, I fully agree with you that, you know, as I listen to you, I think we have to make the point very clearly that these two realities are not mutually exclusive. That we can expand and we must expand the Council. I think there shouldn't be any question about it. The Council has to be expanded precisely for the reason we have explained. About that 1.3 billion people region continue to be, you know, excluded. That is not possible. So they are not two exclusively exclusive demands and realities. Yes, the Council has to be expanded. Yes, some of reality where there are aspirations for democracy within and outside and between countries and globally, we need a fairer world. And a fairer world will mean that indeed when we go and when we have these responsibilities under chapter Article 24 of the Charter, we have to know that power or sovereignty comes with responsibility. Then we cannot only exercise authority on national grounds without indeed ensuring that everything that is wrong with the Council today is. But back to Anna, and I will end with that. And sorry, Jean, I will also make a few comments on your questions. Anna, and this is why I said we live in a real world. And what Anna is proposing was already tried. The League of Nations was precisely this kind of system in which the powers of the time were not included, didn't feel totally, that their concerns were addressed for our good. And the League of Nations collapsed. So we cannot deny the fact that there are powers that are more powerful than us. I mean, that's the reality of our world. But as I said, power comes with responsibility. That's why instead of course, in the world, just all move to the General Assembly and have only the General Assembly, not invoke the General Assembly only in case of in specific case as it was the case in the 50s, 1956 on the Korea War. Let us go back to the GA. But since this is not the case, we live in a real world, and therefore, I would frankly consider that we have to increase the cost of the veto. We have to increase the cost of responsibility. And the peoples of the world have to, of course, demand for Council members that they walk the talk and that they really fulfill their responsibility to humanity. And therefore, it's been already laid down by the General Assembly. I mean, please, whenever there are major risks of massive violations of human rights, crimes of genocide, or any kind of egregious crimes, any member state that belongs to this common world, and that is under the Charter, Article 24, responsible for the whole in the name of in the context of the indivisibility for peace and security, should refrain from this. Is already on the public place, and member states are already. So that's why let us ensure that we don't take away power for those who have power, but we add. And as we add, we make sure that it is used responsibly, and therefore an expansion in both categories and recognizing that in the current world we're living in, we still need, to ask those who have greater power and responsibility to exercise this in a way that is serving, the global community. This is the way to go, and that's why, Jean, I can simply say that we were all in Oran on the eve of the adoption of Resolution 2719, and Petro, we were all together. And in the room, I made the comment that as we speak, the Council was certainly adopting one of its most consequential resolutions in recent history. And I still stand by that statement, because 2719, besides the fact that it is a glass that are fuller than emptier, 3/4 of a glass is a full glass. So, it's a glass that is filling. And therefore, as the Council made that decision, it is indeed responding to the made by the African Union for a long time, that they needed to have a specific response to address their specific needs. And SG joined that call and has been consistent in requesting the Security Council to ensure that it set aside assess contributions to help the continent face the dangers that are before it in the name of the international community. So I will leave it there, but there is a...
So you see, this is the reason why having you is always a pleasure.
Why?
This is exactly why we need to, we asked for your presence. Thank you very much for that. Ambassador.
My brother, Ambassador Petro Mona, when he talked about having different approaches and different platforms, he just did not tell you that when Uganda chaired the AU Peace and Security Council in May, and Switzerland was also chairing the UN Security Council, that kind of cooperation helped us a lot, to the extent that we tried to reconcile our programs. And I'm happy to report that many of the issues that we raised from the AU side really was able to fit in the UN Security Council. And I would say that we got not less than 75 to 80% results, which was positive. So when you speak of relationship different platforms, we take it seriously. I should also say that even in Addis Ababa, the P5 we are talking about are open to discussions. We always have a lot of discussions with them, and you see that they mean well. And another group, the G4, they're also very active. They always call us and we have our honest discussions. We can only say that in Uganda, we believe that any engagement, be it negative or positive, is progress, because it's worse than not speaking. We've heard from the platform, those in the virtual space. Did we know that at some point people think that actually let us just abolish the veto power? It's not useful, because we've had this discussion today. We've got it, and when we are moving into the summit, and we have this sideline summit, the C10, we are able to tell our principals that, by the way, there's a new approach that has come from the population of Africa, which is very important. To my brother, Okoya, are you saying that the UN mission peacekeeping should now get out completely? You need to let us understand. My brother, I want you to imagine when they were first deployed decades ago. As young people, when you saw the UN flag with those uniforms, surely you think peace is already with you. That was a different context. We are just talking of the complexity, the situation that has changed. But like you stated so well, that there's a lot of move, especially with the UN Secretary General. I see him having a vision of making it different positively. And I think my brother Nyanga said it so well. To my brother, Dr. Jean, you just reminded us of what we went through in the at the EU AU Peace, Peace and Security Council, and I was chairing. We only agreed that we have different opinions, but we have to discuss with respect. And still, I would like to appreciate all the members of EU and also UK, who is now out of EU, but with very close cooperation with us, that we made a bit of preparation with the representatives of the EU, that however tough it wasn't as shocking, because we already knew that there are some areas of divergence and we would not agree. And that's the way to go, because we have a common good. Finally, allow me to thank the panelists and Solomon. Listening to them, by the way, because I was quiet, I would tell you something very interesting, that on this panel, the name Tekede means together we are stronger, strength in unity in my language. And then Ayela is a bit of conflict. That is its name. Onyanga is understanding. And you can see where I am. And then delivered to that result. So I just would like to thank you. You're a bit stubborn. That's the name. So putting this panel together, for me, I've benefited a lot. And also I would like to thank those who have come, because I know most of you, and I know how useful you are to this kind of debate. But we say thank you, Solomon, and all these panelists, especially my senior. Would I say thank you? I like it when you say that you are now non-aligned, like what happened in Uganda. And I would like to also agree with Dr. Exactly what my brother Pedro was saying, that we must expand our area of negotiation and discussion, like the ambassador said, let us be logical, realistic. And we carry that in a good packet of those who are our principals. Some of them are a little bit of our paycheck. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. I know that Her Excellency Ambassador Rebecca, given the time pressure that she has, she may need to go not long after now. That is why she is making her thanks as well. I think I need to change my name. To be in her good books, you know. Provocateur. Yeah. So we will have the Deputy Permanent Representative of Japan, who have kindly joined us early in the morning from New York shortly. But before that, we would give the floor to Ambassador Takeda for his reflections on very good questions and reflections that have been floated, including the question of how about doing away with permanent membership altogether. Ambassador.
Yeah, that would not be very realistic. I really have very little to what has already been said by my brother Parfait and Ambassador Rebecca. Now, there was something that was said by the ambassador of Switzerland, with which really I agree with most of what was said. But one area where I had some problem was a connection with what Your Excellency said about the numbers. I thought that numbers matter. You probably do not mean that, but really, at the end of the day, the democratic outcome of the debate discussion is going to be decided by vote, and votes matter. Therefore, but at the same time, you said you are okay with the African position, really. And I found that very consoling. True. But you see, where I was coming from was in connection with what is expected from the summit of the future and the outcome document act. What is it that we want to be reflected in that outcome document? I thought we are in a very serious business now. On the part of the Secretary General, there appears to be a serious commitment to help initiate a serious debate, serious discussion on these issues. As I quoted what he said in my statement, in my presentation, he attached great importance to peace. Peace is becoming a linchpin for everything that we do in the human rights area, in development, and related areas. Peace. Therefore, what is it that Africa can contribute in that debate, in that discussion? This has been my major preoccupation, really. This debate is not one of those run-of-the-mill debates. It's different because we have to handle it in connection with what is going to happen, in connection with the Summit of the Future, which is going to be convened in September 2024. And what do we want to see in the outcome document? That is something that I hope the AU will continue to focus on this, really. Now, the issue that Hannah raised, I mean, it's not Hannah's view. I mean, it's a view that was reflected by people who are following this on a Zoom or whatever. And I have to be very open. I mean, it lacks discipline, really, again, because one can come up with all sorts of questions, with all sorts of proposals. At the end of the day, I mean, are those realistic? You know, practical? This has to be considered, of course. And I'm not blaming people who raise issues, but this is a time when we need to exercise a high level of discipline. Otherwise, we are not going to be able to make things. That is what I want to say, really. I don't want to take too much of your time. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for your rich and kind reflections on the issues that have yes, please that have been raised. I'm pleased that Ambassador Rebecca would stay a little bit longer with us. So happy to have her continue engaging with us, because part of what this kind of reflection would wish to do is basically for Ambassador Rebecca to take with her, including Jean and others, Embassy of Egypt and others, to take with them some of these thoughts and inject them into the deliberations and decisions in the summit around this issue of reform and how Africa can position itself. So we are happy to have you continue with us. Ladies and gentlemen, please bear with us. We will continue with the proceeding. I know that if we take coffee or tea break, some of you may be tempted to go away. So it would be good if we are able to have Her Excellency the Ambassador, Her Excellency Ambassador Shino Mitsoko, Deputy Permanent Representative of Japan to the United Nations, who has joined us online. Thank you very much, Excellency Ambassador, for joining us. It is really wonderful to have you be part of this conversation and helping us to be the bridge between Addis and New York. Your Excellency, we look forward to your rich contribution, and you have the floor, please. Thank you very much again.
Thank you very much. Good morning from New York. Good morning. Do you hear me?
Good morning to you as well. Loud and clear.
Good. Well, thank you very much. I just wanted to share you the beautiful view from my window, which shows the UN. Here it is. So very good morning. How? This is me. Yes. Well, I'd like to congratulate you, all of you, for successfully convening this important and timely seminar, and thank you for allowing me to join you virtually from New York. Timely because the discussions on Security Council reform are actively going on at the UN right now, and moreover, I see the African leaders will meet at the AU summit next week to talk about the future of Africa. Today, I would like to communicate 3 messages regarding Security Council reform. First, time is of the essence. The bus is about to leave, and we must not miss it, especially if you want to sit in the driver's seat. Second, Security Council membership is not a right, but a responsibility. And far more countries are ready to take up this responsibility than when the UN was founded, especially in the case of Africa, to represent their own region. Third, we must consider how to take concrete action to finally reform the Council. Now I will start with the current state of the reform discussions, including in the IGN. Colleagues, Excellencies, as pressure from the member states to reform the Council increases by the day, I believe our discussions are entering a new stage. Our shared aspirations are evident in this year's intergovernmental negotiations on Security Council reform, or IGN in short, authorized by the General Assembly under the leadership of Kuwait and Austria as IGN co-chairs, who you heard from earlier in this seminar. Member states are engaged in active discussions. What is special about this year is that the IGN is considering specific reform models. As of today, Mexico, Liechtenstein, the L69, and the G4 have all submitted their detailed plans for reform, and the Uniting for Consensus group, in former name Coffee Group, will do so soon. I myself attended the IGN session last month, where we had a lively debate on the models submitted by Mexico and Liechtenstein. Of course, attending countries and groups had different views and positions. Nonetheless, the conversation felt far more concrete and forward-looking than previous rounds. Our colleagues from Sierra Leone also once again compellingly advocated for a common African position. The willingness of member states to move forward through practical and serious discussions is truly commendable. We do not call these text-based negotiations yet, but discussions on the texts of concrete models have now begun. In the coming weeks, the IGN will deliberate the L69 and G4 proposals. Both models include an expansion in both permanent and non-permanent categories and align with the common African position. The last month's position models, Mexico and Liechtenstein, they didn't include the expansion of the permanent seats. We hope to hear voices from the African continent speaking in support of our proposals expanding the permanent seats, namely an expansion that includes new permanent seats. To my colleagues in Addis Ababa, I highly recommend watching the webcast of the IGN discussions, especially recorded discussions from the last month, which is January the 22nd, to explore synergies between your conversations and those in New York. And we strongly look forward to the African group submitting its own model soon. I repeat, the bus is about to leave. And if you want to sit in the driver's seat, you have to act now. Another key trend I would like to mention concerns the Council's 5 permanent members. In the past, the P5 were reluctant to dilute their special privileges. However, due to the pressure from member states, especially from Africa, all 5 of them, in one way or another, now support or accept reform. Taking advantage of this development, we must be united and seize the opportunity to achieve concrete progress. Now I would like to move to the view inside the Council. Japan has served as a non-permanent Council member for the past 13 months, and this is our 12th time on the Council since joining the UN, and I am convinced that being in Security Council is not a right, but the responsibility. A responsibility to maintain international peace and security. The world is facing many threats, and divisions among Council membership are deep. In this environment, as a responsible Council member, Japan has been working closely with our fellow members, especially the elected 10, to make sure the Council fulfills its mandate. After the Second World War, the international community drew comfort by entrusting the P5 with the power to maintain international peace and security. But the world has changed. More and more countries are ready to take up this responsibility, particularly in their own region. As you have often said, Africa must decide regarding African matters. The Council continues to deliberate on many issues concerning peace and security in Africa, but Africa is not represented as it should be. In this context, I would like to congratulate the adoption of the resolution on the financing of African Union-led peace support operations at the end of last year. This will empower the partnership between the UN Security Council and the African Union Peace and Security Council and better ensure peace and security in Africa. The dedicated work by the A3 in this challenging moment is something all Council members should look up to. The fundamental problem is that the Council fails to reflect today's reality, and this has seriously impacted its legitimacy. With a first-hand view of the back and forth negotiations inside and outside Council chamber, I painfully see that it is imperative to reform the Council and improve and strengthen the functions of the UN more generally. I repeat once again, Council membership is not a right, but a heavy responsibility, one that many more countries and groups are ready to shoulder than what the case in 1945. More member states, especially from Africa, should have a seat on the bus, and not just any seat, but the driver's seat. Now, the way forward towards reform. The third and final message I wish to convey concerns our way forward. Looking around, there is clearly a universal appetite for updating the Security Council. Last year at UNGA, more than 80 countries, including more than 30 African countries, called for Security Council reform, a record number. So why hasn't the reform happened? It is because of divisions among the membership and complexity of the issue, which have made many too pessimistic to engage in serious negotiations. Therefore, the key to moving forward is, I believe, to stoke the fire and start the engine of the vehicle for reform. Let us look at where we are right now. Africa has advocated through the Common African Position for an enhanced representation in the Council, which is well deserved. Japan, as a long-time friend of Africa through various initiatives such as TICAD and numerous development programs, supports the Common African Position, including allocating 2 new permanent seats for the continent. We believe that expanding both permanent and non-permanent membership is the best way for the Security Council to restore its credibility and legitimacy. Underrepresented regions of the world deserve greater voice. Their participation will surely contribute to regional and global security. Japan, like Africa, has long been an outspoken advocate for Security Council reform. Over the years, our position has evolved. Early on, we admit that Japan's ambition to be a permanent member of the world's most powerful forum was a primary reason for our support for reform today. Today, of course, we still maintain this ambition and take pride in our critical role in maintaining international peace. Nonetheless, our aspiration today is more far-reaching. That is, recreating the Council so that it better reflects contemporary realities and is more representative, legitimate, and effective. This is the only way to rebuild trust in the Council and the United Nations as a whole. Japan's efforts are no longer purely individual diplomatic attempt, but rather a collective endeavor by and for the whole international community. The years 2024 and 2025 will be pivotal. As many have already pointed out, the Summit of the Future will take place on 22nd and 23rd of September this year. And next year, we will have the 80th anniversary of the UN. To prepare, we must engage sincerely and productively in the IGN discussions on the Pact of the Future. Just as the World Summit of 2005 gave new impetus to Security Council reform, the Summit of the Future should urge us all to seek and deliver concrete results. Let us sit down at the negotiating table and lay out serious plans for a reformed UN that is ready to face the future. Colleagues and friends and excellencies, I'd like to close my remarks by reiterating my message to Africa on Security Council reform. Reform today is needed more than at any other time, and we clearly see a window of opportunity. Our job in both New York and Addis Ababa is to engage in earnest conversations to find more convergences and identify remaining gaps. That way, we can allow our leaders to make informed decisions on hard questions when they convene at UNGA in September. Throughout this journey, Japan will remain a reliable partner for Africa, and we count on your energy and creativity. Thank you for your attention, and Mike is back to the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for sharing with us the current state of discussions and the sense of the realities in New York as we speak today, how much the window of opportunity that you highlighted that needs to be seized, the importance of recognizing the fact that time is of the essence, and the possibilities that exist, of course, for finding convergence on models for reform of the UN Security Council, for identifying and addressing as you rightly mentioned. And you also expressed support for Africa's common position, including in respect to the expansion of the membership of the UN Security Council with 2 permanent membership, which is in consonance with African common position. And you reminded us in the context of the current reality, how it is important for the UN Security Council to reflect contemporary realities, which is critical for rebuilding trust in the Council. Thank you very much for all those very rich and important remarks, and also the opportunities that exist for taking this discussion forward. And indeed, we fully agree with you. We have to engage in earnest discussions and negotiations on how to see this fast-closing window of opportunity within the framework of the Summit of the Future. Indeed, it is within that context that we have convened here in Addis with your participation, with the collaboration between Amani Africa and Japan, for which we are very grateful once again. Ladies and gentlemen, we now hear the message from the intergovernmental, the co-chairs of the intergovernmental negotiation, to which many of the panelists made reference earlier on. Kuwait and Austria are the co-chairs of the intergovernmental negotiation on the reform of the UN Security Council. As the DPR of Japan mentioned, there are very encouraging discussions and options being explored within that framework. So let's hear the message of the co-chairs, the PR of Kuwait and that of Austria.
Greetings to all esteemed colleagues, distinguished guests, and our friends gathered in the beautiful city of Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. It is with great honor that we address you today through this video message as co-chairs of the intergovernmental negotiations on Security Council reform.
First and foremost, we want to extend our gratitude to the government of Japan and to Amani Africa for their effort in organizing this seminar. Your dedication to fostering dialogue on Security Council reform is truly commendable, and it's also vital for our collective pursuit of a more effective and representative UN Security Council. As co-chairs of the IGN, we've placed particular emphasis on involving think tanks and academia into our work, and we're therefore particularly happy to see that this is also continued in Africa.
African representation in the UN Security Council is one of the most debated issues in the deliberations of the IGN, and also one topic with a lot of convergence. Redressing the historical injustice against Africa in the Security Council is viewed as a priority among all delegations at the United Nations. To a certain degree, the question of African representation also holds the key to unlocking Security Council reform. Many questions could be solved by agreeing on a model of African representation in an enlarged and more representative Security Council. Over the past year, as co-chairs of the IGN, we have been delighted with the progress we have witnessed. The dialogue has been constructive, with an increasing willingness among member states to engage, share perspectives, and seek common ground. This is a promising sign for our collective journey towards reform.
The current session of the IGN is particularly focused on the Summit of the Future, which is widely regarded among delegations as an inflection point for Security Council reform. Delegations, but also the wider public, rightly expect an ambitious and forward-looking outcome on the reform of the Security Council at this summit in September. The United Nations can only deliver on its mandate if the organs are inclusive, representative, and reflect today's world. As co-chairs of the IGN, we remain committed to contributing to an ambitious outcome on Security Council reform at the Summit of the Future and towards moving the process forward to achieve an early reform. And as we look to the future, we are filled with optimism. The discussions and meetings ahead are crucial stepping stones towards clarifying positions and bridging divides. We believe that through a continued dialogue, flexibility, and a shared commitment to progress, we can achieve the very reform that the UN needs to better serve our global community.
We sincerely thank each one of you for your participation and contributions to this seminar. Your involvement is a powerful reminder of the importance of our mission and the impact of our collective efforts can have.
We're eager to see the outcomes of your discussions. We're committed also to carrying forward our shared objectives. Thanks again for allowing us to be part of this event, even if it's from far away. Let's continue to work together with hope and determination towards a reform, towards a better Security Council that reflects the needs and the hopes of all member states and the public.
Thank you for your attention, and we wish you a productive and successful seminar.
All the best.
Take care.
We are very grateful for the ambassadors of Kuwait and Austria, His Excellency Ambassador Tariq Albanai, permanent representative of Kuwait, and His Excellency Alexander Mashik, permanent representative of Austria to the UN, for their very encouraging reflections on the state of negotiations and discussions in the IGN, and why this particular moment is much more optimistic than previous moments, and why there is a possibility for achieving progress on the reform of the UN Security Council. With that, I would like now to open the floor once again for questions, reflections from the floor, both here in the hall, but also virtually. We have with us the DPR of Japan, without a still. So if you have questions from the perspective of New York for her reflection as well, you are welcome to also post questions and comments for her. Okay, we have a request for the floor from your brother from the embassy, the DPR of Egypt, please.
Thank you very much. At the outset, let me thank you, Mr. Solomon, and the esteemed think tank of Amani Africa. And we also commend your great efforts with the Cairo International Center for Conflict Resolution, Peacekeeping and Peace Building in Cairo. Your efforts are very well appreciated. Of course, I would like to align my comment and my remarks with what has been mentioned by Her Excellency, the Ambassador of Uganda. Egypt has always been a strong advocate of multilateralism. And however, let's call a spade a spade. You know, the Security Council at the moment is a dysfunctional organ. It is in dire need of reform, and this is something that is urgent. And like Her Excellency the Ambassador of Japan said in New York, it's urgent and it's timely. Conflicts around the world are erupting. We have a major conflict at the northeastern border of our own continent, Africa, in Palestine. Children and hospitals are being targeted daily as we speak. Africa's fair and just and long overdue need for a representation in the Security Council is a necessity at the moment. It is not a luxury, it is a necessity. 60% of the conflicts are occurring all around the globe are occurring in Africa. And most of the peacekeeping missions are happening in Africa. But at the same time, what we're trying to say, like Her Excellency, if you may allow me to steal Her Excellency Ambassador of Japan's metaphor, you mentioned that the bus is about to leave and that it is now the time to jump into the bus and get into the driver's seat. However, like also what was mentioned by His Excellency, the permanent representative of Austria, we are at an inflection point. So is it really wise to rush into an inflection point? Is that really what we should do at the moment? This is food for thought, but rushing into a text-based negotiations at this inflection point at this time has to be redressed, and we believe that until there is full consensus and full agreement on all the main topics regarding Security Council reform, specifically the 5 clusters that we're talking about, then we are jumping into a bus that we don't know what is the bus, how many drivers are in the bus, how many seats are in the bus, how big is the bus, how high is the bus, where is this bus going? Is it going to Debrezate? Is it going to far? We don't know. So these are all questions that we have to ask ourselves. So text-based negotiations should not be rushed into, and we should not get encapsulated into a text that we start to prop and stretch and tear down and take from and put into, and then when we have the summit of the future, which is an inflection point, like was mentioned, we have come to a crossroads where, at this critical point, where we won't have a second chance. Getting a second chance for Security Council reform is not really on the table at the moment. This has been discussed since 1979. I was born in 1979, by the way, so that's like 45 years ago. So we won't get a second chance for this reform, so we have to do it right. We have to do it with full consensus, full international consensus. The African position, we believe that it should be the mantra, the common African position, and getting a consensus, getting an Azoean consensus in Africa is not just a yardstick or a milestone, but it is a cornerstone, and it should be heavily adhered to and heavily supported, and it should become our future mantra in the Summit of the Future and in all other international fora. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for those reflections on the question, urgency, imperative of reform, and getting the reform right on the basis of holding to and sticking to the cornerstone. I think that is the point that my brother from Egypt made. Your Excellency, you were raising your hand as well. I give you the floor. Sorry, from the African Union. Yes, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chair, and through you, I thank all the honorable panelists who really enlightened us with these valuable thoughts. You know, given that my current portfolio at the African Union has absolutely nothing to do with the UN Security Council reform, I'm very happy to ask questions rather than the usual of trying to offer answers. In a chapter in a book that will appear for me in a couple of months, hopefully, if Palgrave ever publishes that globe on the Global South, I argue that although the Security Council reform has not reformed, at least since 1963, 1965, and the UN has reformed partially 2005 with the creation of new Human Rights Council and Peace Building Commission. However, there is a subtle reform that is taking either in the working methods of the UN or in multilateralism in general by the creation of minilateral and parallel forums such as the G20. And from here, my question is, to what extent do we think of Security Council reform within the global reform of multilateralism, and particularly the growing space and contribution of parallel forums such as the G20? A question that assumes a higher importance as the African Union finally assumes its permanent membership in the G20. So to what extent do the honorable panelists see this new model of AU participation in the G20 as a possible model, as a possible formula for participating in reform in other institutions? If you allow me, I'll ask a question to Her Excellency Ambassador Rebecca of Uganda. We are very proud that Uganda is an African now chair of the non-aligned movement, and of course the successful summit that was just hosted. I think Uganda has a historic opportunity, if I understand correctly, and I'm not anymore in New York. I've spent quite a few years there, but not anymore. Uganda is also the chair of the G77, if I'm not mistaken, which I do not think, at least in the recent history since I started following this matter 33 years after graduating from university. So I'm much older than my brother Mohammed Barhan. Any country has actually chaired the two forums in the same year. While every time we attend a NAM meeting, we say we should coordinate more with the 77. And every time we attend the 77, we say, oh, we have the Joint Coordination Committee with the NAM. So the one country that can bring this to reality, because of practicality, is Uganda. So I wonder, what agenda do you have for bringing in everything that's economic social reform with everything that's political, strategic, peace and security reform, since you have the historic opportunity that hasn't happened for quite a few years, if it has happened at all. Final question to our honorable ambassador from Japan, from New York. Thank you for joining us from there. You repeated, dear ambassador, more than once how Japan is fully supportive of the African Union, common African Union position. Now, it would be great if on video you actually say that this support is not only for the permanent membership, but for the Iselwini and consensus and the third declaration, which link the permanent membership with the right of veto. So does Japan support the common African position, 2 permanent members with veto plus 3 non-permanent? I think this would be an incredible outcome that our dear Dr. Narasu can actually highlight in the outcome of that session. I thank you, and I'm sorry that I took too much time for them. Thank you.
For very, very solid, really very important questions that we actually, your question on the G20 model as a model for representation in the Security Council adds another option to reflect on and consider whether that is something that the African Union member states would like to take as an option for representation is indeed a very serious order to have. Your question on Japan support, as well as, of course, the spatial place that Uganda occupies now by being a chair of both G77 as well as the non-aligned movement, and how we can take advantage of that. So I think those are really very important questions. Let me give the floor to the Deputy Permanent Representative of Japan to respond to the question that have been raised, and then I'll come back to the other panels as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Solomon and others, for the lively questions. Yes, my metaphor said the bus is about to leave, and if you don't want to be led alone behind the bus started, you have to jump into the bus. But you rightly said, you have to know where the bus goes. And who decides where the bus goes? That's the driver. So that's my meaning it. If you want to change the Security Council, you have to be in this reform process. And if you want to know where this reform goes, you have to be in the driver's seat. That means we are quite willing to see the Africa's model coming up. You mentioned about the Ezruini consensus, the Egypt and the other person who questioned. Japan fully support this Ezruini consensus, and we are really willing to see this evolve, because Ezruini consensus mentions the African representation, but not others. And now we are facing the global reform of the Security Council. So it shall be more, so to say, addressed for the other parts of the world too. So we are waiting that Africa brings up the African reform model and to discuss the issue in the IGN. And that will be a game changer. I will say it will be a real, true game changer. And based on the Africa's model, we can start discussing. That means you have the right to drive the bus where to go. And this is a real opportunity for you to present your so to say model. And that's the reason why I'm really, really grateful to have this seminar 1 week before that African leaders meet in the African AU Summit. So I am truly waiting the Africa bringing up your own, so to say, proposal. Regarding the veto, that's a very, very sensitive question. But if you see that recent Security Council, who casted veto? Russia, China, and US. The UK and France, they don't cast veto. And sitting in a Security Council, I'm thinking whether Japan has any chance to cast veto, not only the simple no. I have to say, I hardly see any chance to cast veto. We constructively engage ourselves for the drafting. So the membership's right is not only casting the vote, but engage ourselves into the drafting. And if you can really engage yourself constructively in the drafting session, you really don't need to cast the veto. So my answer to the veto is, it is possible to have veto, but having the veto and using the veto right is two different things. We may have the veto right, but I don't think Japan is willing to use it unless it is really necessary. So that is something like a Mexico and French suggestions. They are suggesting to have the veto, but not exercising it unless it is a serious atrocities on the humanitarian situation or something like that. So that is my answer to the veto. Thank you.
Thank you again, Ambassador. Let me give the floor to Ambassador Rebecca, who would need to leave us shortly as well, and then we will have a final roundup. Before she leaves, we would like also to observe a minute of silence. But later, let me give her the floor, and then we will continue.
I want to begin by saying there's no way you are going to run away from the UN reform as long as you are at the AU. I want to tell my brother that in one way or the other, we are in it together. Then I would like to first of all, appreciate you so much for bringing in the issue of the NAM and then the G77 plus China, the twin chairmanship, which is historic. I would say that it's humbling on our part, but it's a big opportunity because in this we should look at the principle of complementarity and also forming synergy. It takes us back to what Ambassador Mona said, that we have to agree that we need different platforms for us to work around this big elephant in the room, the UN Security Council reform. And therefore, I totally do agree with you that it's a big opportunity, but looking at bringing together almost 132 countries together in different formations, UN family, I think we're about 190, 192. Depends on how we take the opportunity as members and also having others buy in what we are doing. But the issue is complementarity and forming synergy.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. If you kindly, with your permission, ladies and gentlemen, Ambassador reminded me earlier that Namibia is a co-chair of the intergovernmental process on the Pact of the Future, which would be the outcome of the Summit of the Future. And as you know, recently Namibia experienced a tragedy by the demise of His Excellency, the President of Namibia. So I would like to request a minute of silence in honor of, in respect of this Pan-Africanist leader of Namibia. Thank you very much. Very much. Please be seated. As Amani Africa, we have been working very closely with Namibia, initially launching high-level process on the reform of multilateralism since the 36th Ordinary Summit of the African Union. And the contribution from Ambassador Takeda, who is a member of the high-level panel, is critical to the report that we are preparing in terms of the report of the high-level panel. So we are grateful to Namibia, and we stand with Namibia at this moment of great loss for them. And we hope the legacy of His Excellency the President lives on. So with that, if there are other questions, we are happy to still receive a few more questions, but let's allow Ambassador Rebecca to take leave of us. Ambassador, we are very grateful. We thank you. And we will of course count on you to take forward the idea on the African Union, as Ambassador Takada mentioned, as part of the discussion on the C10 report, adopting position on Article 109. Thank you very much, Ambassador. You go away. Thank you so much. Thank you, Ambassador. Yeah. I have seen a hand here.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Tasfay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mr. Tasfay from OPAD. I have two questions, but before the Ambassador of Japan left us, I want to forward first question to her, and I'll come back to my second question later. Looking back, Japan, along with UK, France, and Italy, held a permanent seat in the League of Nations. Considering the hypothetical scenario of Japan securing permanent seat at the UN Security Council today, what would be the implication of this development, and how would it impact the Japan's relation with Africa? Thank you very much.
To Her Excellency, the DPR, if you can repeat, please.
Okay, thank you very much. So looking back in history, Japan, along with UK, France, and Italy, held a permanent seat in the League of Nations. Considering the hypothetical scenario of Japan securing a permanent seat at the UN Security Council today, what would be the implication of that development, and how would it impact Japan's relation with Africa?
So if in the very positive outcome of Japan's membership in the UN Security Council, what would be Japan? How would this affect Japan's relationship with Africa is the question. Ambassador, is there any other question, by the way? Any other question or reflection? No? Okay. So I will quickly give the floor to Her Excellency, the DPR of Japan, come back to Ambassador Takata, and then His Excellency SRSG. Then we will close. Ambassador, you have the floor, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much for very, very interesting questions. Well, Japan's position for the United Nations is not only security alone can secure the security. It sounds very contradictionally, but we think that root cause of insecurity is more or less lies on the poverty and the development issues. So if Japan joins to the permanent seats of the Security Council, we will try to realize the the peace and development and humanitarian issues nexus. Because we cannot address only the security matters, we have to at the same time address the root causes, the poverty and development issues. And Japan is keen to assist the Africa for the development side too. So we would like to achieve the sustainable peace from addressing from the both sides. We will keep supporting you for your development assistance through TICAD or JICA and other forum too. And utilizing this development side, we would like to achieve the sustainable peace. Well, in other words, we do not want to talk about security pure in the Security Council. We would like to see the connection between the security matters and root causes. And one of the, so to say, endeavors we all already started is bridging the Security Council to the other forum, like a peace building commissions or ECOSOC or other UN entities. We are right now trying to find out what would be the best way to find out this bridging functions of the PBC. So we are very much, so to say, active participants in the PBC, which is a peace building commission too. So my answer to you very short is, if we will be the permanent member of the Security Council, we will engage ourselves much, much more and deeper to address the root causes of that insecurity, which is development. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Ambassador, once again. Let me now give the floor to Ambassador Takeda and then SRSG Parfait.
To wrap up, good. Short. Good. So I want to thank Amani Africa for organizing this event with Japan. I really am very, very appreciative. Personally, I'm also very grateful. This, I suppose, is the second time that I am participating in an event focusing on the reform of the Security Council. I'm very hopeful that this kind of dialogue will continue. As I said earlier, we are at a very, very critical moment, really. I have no doubt everybody realizes that not only Africa, but the world in general is at crossroads. The challenge we are facing is just enormous, really, and in a way very unprecedented. Therefore, our unity is going to be very critical. I'm very hopeful. I understand the deficiency even within Africa. We tend to talk a lot, but when it comes to the practical area of carrying out our obligations, I think there is much to be desired. We will need to do more in that regard. Even if we are united, I mean, it would still be an uphill struggle, really, to be able to address the challenge we're facing. Therefore, the events that are organized by Amani Africa are going to be very helpful. The process that Amani Africa has begun with the cooperation of in partnership with Namibia is extremely helpful, and I'm very hopeful that it will continue. Therefore, I feel like we have had a very useful exchange of views today at the event. Again, hopeful that other meetings will be organized again and again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for that last part as well, that this moment requires us sustaining continuous engagement and dialogue. Let me pass the floor to SRG Pafe.
Thank you very much, Dr. Solomon, and let me also join my dear brother and elder Ambassador Takeda in thanking you and in congratulating you on this absolutely timely and critical conversation that will need, of course, to be expanded. It was good to hear directly from the co-chairs of the IGN process in New York. Two very, able and skillful diplomat. I had the privilege of working with them in other incarnations. So I do think that we are in very good hands. And let me also maybe insist on why it is a critical moment, as Ambassador Takeda put it earlier. Often the UN finds itself at a turning point. And this presents, of course, the membership opportunities to reflect on how far we have gone in fulfilling our commitments to the people that the nations serve, and us as a secretariat, much support we have been able to provide to these endeavors. And as the colleague dear brother from the AU mentioned, these constitute and are often constituted moments of progress, as tiny as they may be. They're often moments of progress. It was the case indeed in 2005. At Summit, some of us, had the privilege of accompanying, and in which, by the way, Africa played a critical role by enabling the whole concept of R2P to come to fruition on the basis of its own Article 2, Article 4, H of its own constitutional act. Those kind of contributions are extremely significant. Now, the continent, of course, will have to engage moving forward, including, if the time is ripe, and it's the goodness of this process is that it is open and it is inclusive. It is building on the express readiness and willingness of all major, regions, countries to say we need reform, but not only in the Security Council, and that's why it's extremely important to put all this conversation against under the context of the Summit of the Future. And the world is strong. It's a pact of the future, which, by the way, is no small commitment by member states. And it's in this context that the Secretary General has been really reflecting deeply on what that pact may contain. And the SG has been very bold, including on the matter of, even though today we focus our conversation on the Security Council reform, but it's broader than that. And for example, the reform is aiming at, six critical areas. One of them is the global economic governance. Here, what the SG and member states are committed to do is to enhance voice and participation of developing countries in in their decision-making process, within the IFIs, the financial institutions. And the goal, and the SG has been very clear about it. And that's why the question asked earlier about the G20 is important, the commitment by the DPR of Japan, Ambassador Mitsuko, is extremely important, reflecting in the spirit of holisticness and the nexus. SG has in mind what he say is to create, and I quote him, an apex body bringing together the entire system under the UN to enhance the coherence, align its priorities with the 2030 agenda. This is the goal. This is wider than just Security Council reform. And it's bold. And the question actually is to ask whether member states will be really go for that kind of, really wide, sweeping, ambitious, project. In 1945, the IFIs were separated from the decision-making process on the Peace and Security Council. It was done. It was that what was allowed at that time, and we have seen how this is dysfunctional. How we have not been able to have an approach that is based on the tenet of multilateralism, solidarity, unity, universality, and equity, which, if of course were brought together, will allow for responses. Contradiction between the work of the PBC, the work of the Security Council, the work on development, everything is interconnected, but yet it has been kept within silos that have really affected deeply the outcomes of the international community. And as I said, it's not the responsibility of individual member states, to assume to address the needs of the countries, and also to establish inclusive systems, as Ambassador Piketty put it earlier, that the reform has to also start at home. Responsibility, but that needs to have a supportive global environment for it to work. And this is where we are today. And that's why this pact of the future cannot be a repetition of the same. We cannot be indeed repeating the same way of doing business and hoping, as some say, that we'll be having different results. So it's an opportunity. Let's take it as an opportunity to really have a change in the way we do business. And that's why, maybe to the specific question about the G20 as a model, of course, I mean, we always, ideally, as we said before, not. But I would simply say that we should avoid to maybe there is no such a thing as one size fits all solutions. I think we have to make progress where it is possible, provided that we are guided by the principles that uphold multilateralism. And if we do away from this, and this is why when we reach serious concerns of further fragmentation and polarization, what we need to do is just to go back to the fundamentals. And what we need to do is to be principled in the way we look at issues before us and try to bring solutions to ensure that we contribute into making a safer, a more inclusive world for all the people of this world. So this is the SG's commitment, and I think it will continue to provide on this level, the kind of seminal leadership that I believe will indeed create a conducive environment for member states to have a very constructive conversation. Now, moving back to the Security Council, look, and I like my younger brother, the DPR of Egypt, referring to history. And indeed, 1979 was the first time the issue was on the agenda of the General Assembly. In 1993 to 1994, the first time the matter was tabled on the agenda of the General Assembly, and happened to be one of those people involved in the initial conversations. And then you wonder whether we need to wait another 30 years, before we can have a meaningful, representation of a body that is so critical, and like the Security Council, where indeed Africa cannot afford, let's insist on that, cannot afford not to have the voice and powers that decision making, that its involvement in the decision making process will allow it to indeed speak with one voice and contribute significantly in the discrepancies that we have so much related. And this is why the Turkey also, in its new agenda for peace, absolutely categorical about the need not only to expand, and to ensure that Africa is represented, but is also making the case to ensure that the working methods of the Council are drastically improved, and that, for example, on matters of pen holdership, of course, Africa takes also, its fair share in becoming a net contributor to the search for peace, security, and stability on the continent. So I will leave it there, but again, this is a serious moment. This is the point. I think I cannot agree more with the ambassador of Japan. This is a serious moment. Let's try to push it, on all aspects, not only Security Council, but on the 6 areas that the Secretary General has identified. Let's really engage in this conversation with earnest, and then to ensure that at the end of the process, we will all be standing and saying we have done well to search for a new dispensation for to allow us to live better together in a world that is so much confronted with so many challenges. You know, we don't need to mention the cascade of challenges, and this is where SJ is right. Push for a reform of the financial architecture. It's absolutely right to ask for an SDG service, billion per year. It's ambitious. It's right to remind that the Paris Agreement and commitment must be fulfilled. Why? Because the reason we are in this situation is precisely because trust is eroded if commitment are not met. This is the problem that we're facing today. So we need to rebuild that trust. The only way to do it is precisely to engage robustly in this conversation because we all care about a better world.
Thank you very much, SRG, for your very rich contribution. I will have just a few wrap-up comments I think the first point is why reform and why reform now? Two things have been said, at least. One is the nature of the challenge that we are confronted with as the human community, that we are confronted with very enormous, increasingly intersecting challenge. The possibility for addressing them can only be viewed and realized if all members of the international community pool their efforts together. But it's not simply the fact that we are at that momentous historical inflection point involving those global power shifts, intensification of tensions, and the perpetration of outrageous atrocities with little regard to basic minimum norms, the dates and cost of living prices, the climate emergency, the regression that we are experiencing with respect to, for example, meeting the Sustainable Development Goals, including fundamentally the regression that we are experiencing with respect to ending poverty, that more people have ended up becoming poor and finding themselves in extreme poverty in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so the enormity of these challenge is one that certainly requires the engagement of all the members of the international community. The good news from what I heard across the different speakers is that it looks like that this is a moment that gives us a window of opportunity for reform. One, particularly in the context of the discussions around the Summit of the Future. So this is one extremely important window of opportunity. The other one is, despite, I mean, it's not simply the fact that there is a discussion about reform of the multilateral system in the context of the Summit of the Future. That is an opportunity. His Excellency SRSG, Ambassador Rebecca, Ambassador Takada, DPR of Japan, the co-chairs, the ambassadors of Kuwait and Austria, all of them made one very important point. But there is increasing willingness for engaging much more meaningfully and constructively for making progress on the question of the reform of the Security Council. I think these two together need to anchor the engagement that we have. Now, in this context, the reflections, therefore, from His Excellency the SRSG in relation to work of the Secretary General in putting forward various policy briefs, not least of all, of course, the new agenda for peace. Peace, as Ambassador Takada quoted from the new agenda for peace, being the very present debt for the very existence of the United Nations organization as a whole. And indeed, that is also, as SSG Parfait reminded us from quoting the Secretary General again from yesterday, that is also what is missing at this point in time. And who bears the responsibility for the fact that this present debt for the UN is missing? All members of the United Nations. And of course, some bear more responsibility, and those in particular in the UN Security Council, particularly permanent members. And hence, the compelling need for addressing this paralysis and dysfunction. And indeed, for some, even the permanent members becoming contributors and accelerators of insecurity and crisis in the world, undermining the effective multilateral functioning and reform. So the importance also of that in relation to Africa. All of you said one thing. Whatever form reform takes, it has to include Africa's position. That is a quote from SRG Parfait. Ambassador Takada said, the legitimacy of Africa's demand for representation in the UN Security Council cannot be denied. That is also a very important point to take note of. The co-chairs affirmed the part that the PR of Kuwait said, the importance of addressing the historical injustice of Africa, and the DPR of Japan about the role Africa's quest for redressing this injustice, how that is actually enabling a more better space for engagement, more willingness on the part of particularly the P5 to consider and engage constructively on the reform process. I mean, this clearly tells you the power of numbers that both Ambassador Petro and Ambassador Takada mentioned. Yes, reform of the Security Council is not an easy exercise. It is challenging. What makes it challenging is that there are contending imperatives at play. On the one hand are imperatives that emerge from principles and values, principles of inclusivity, principles of legitimacy, principles of representation, the principle of universalism. These principles are the bedrock on which this quest for reform and for democratizing the UN Security Council are driving. And of course, also importantly, the dynamics that have changed in the world together with these principles, right? But there is another imperative that's at play, the reality of life and the world. And that reality has to do with power, all right? How do we make power engage and play in this process is the question. That is where the power of numbers, that is where the power of persuasion and thought leadership, that is where the speaking with one voice becomes critical. And it is therefore in that context that I think we would be able to say that this is a moment for reform. There is a window of opportunity. It requires us to be constructively engaging, and the Africa's legitimate quest, and indeed the justness of its position, and its recognition, and ultimately, of course, taking advantage of this the fact that time is of the essence, that we have to all work hard and with speed in order to realize the kind of world that we all aspire, the kind of world that comes very close to the promise of the United Nations Charter. And we have, therefore, to take advantage of the opportunities presented by the various options being presented by the Secretary General through the policy briefs and the negotiations led by Germany and Namibia. With that, I would like to once again thank all of you. The last word, and a very authoritative word, would be to the Ambassador of Japan, permanent representative to the African Union. His Excellency would give us the last word of wisdom. We wrap up. I wish to once again thank all of you for your patience and participation. Let me give the DPR of Japan for her to say her last word, and we wish her, of course, a very good day as we wrap up the day here in Addis. DPR, you have the floor, and then we come to you, Ambassador, for your last word.
Thank you.
Please.
Thank you very much for giving me the last floor. And I thank you, Amani Group, and Dr. Solomon, and all the participants who are still in the room and listening to this seminar. My last remarks is very short. I just would like to say, reflecting the questions and so on, that reform is now happening. And if you want to decide your own future, your own fate, you have to jump into the place and be the leadership. You have to take the leading role. Otherwise, somebody else will decide your fate and future. And if you don't want to let any other person do that, like we did in 1945, we have to act by ourselves. So please, Africa, bring your own reform model, and that will be a true game changer. Once again, I thank you very much for this opportunity, and all the best to the people of Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. Much appreciated for your words of wisdom, and also for adding further voice for Africa to continue to contribute. Your Excellency, Ambassador, your last word of wisdom, and then we will close off.
Thank you very much, everybody. And also, thank you very much, Chair, Dr. Solomon, and also Professor, and also Ambassador. And I'm Ambassador of Japan to AU. And today's seminar is a kind of collaboration work with our mission and money. And I'm not the expert of the UN Security Council, so I have nothing to add with my colleague Shino-san has already explained. But if I say something responding to the previous question from some of our colleagues, what Japan will do once after being the member of the permanent security members. And my answer is very simple. Our position will not change. Our position is very clear and very simple. We are always a partner of the African countries. And so what we will do, what we can do, what we have done so far will not change. But as a member of the Security Council, we will take more responsibility. That means we will take more roles. That's very simple. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Please join me in thanking the panelists for their words of wisdom, for their insights. Please join me in thanking them. Thank you very much, Ambassador Takada. Thank you very much, SRC Parfait. Also, Ambassador DPR of Japan, the co-chairs, as well as Ambassador Rebecca. Of course, to you, SRSG, also for you for being a very great partner for Amani Africa. We did similar exercise at the end of last year. We look forward to doing the same moving forward. The next one may actually be with you. Thank you very much once again. We wish you a very good evening and much deserved coffee outside for you as well. Thank you very much again. Thanks.